Jasmine had always dreamed of doing something meaningful with her life. Growing up in a modest neighborhood, she worked hard to make ends meet, taking on various caregiving jobs to help her family. She didn't mind the work, she loved helping others, but the reality was that she had little time for herself. Her days were filled with taking care of the elderly, and it was hard for her to imagine that anything could change. But one day she was assigned to a new client. Little did she know that this assignment would change everything for her. Her new client was Ethan, a young boy in his early teens. What made him different from other children she had cared for was that Ethan had a disability that required constant attention and care. He had been born with a condition that left him unable to move on his own, and his needs were beyond what most caregivers could handle. But Jasmine wasn't afraid of hard work. She had taken care of children before, and she knew how to manage even the most difficult situations. However, what made this job particularly unusual was Ethan's father, Mr. Matthews. Mr. Matthews was a billionaire businessman, known for his success in the corporate world. His wealth had brought him all the luxuries anyone could imagine. He lived in a huge mansion on the outskirts of the city, and everything about his life seemed perfect from the outside. But despite all his success, he was a man who seemed to have lost touch with the things that truly mattered. Jasmine didn't know it yet, but his life was about to be transformed by something as simple as a human connection. The first time Jasmine arrived at Mr. Matthews' mansion, she was in awe. It was a grand estate, with tall gates and a long driveway that led to an impressive front door. She couldn't help but feel a little out of place as she walked inside, her shoes clicking against the marble floors. Mr. Matthews was in his office when she arrived, and she was introduced to Ethan by a maid who showed her to the room where he was waiting. Ethan sat in a wheelchair by the window, staring out at the garden. His eyes were dull, as though he had long since given up hope that things might ever change. Jasmine could tell that he wasn't just physically limited. There was a deep sadness in his eyes that made her heart ache. He didn't speak much, and when he did, his voice was soft and faint, like he had grown accustomed to being ignored or left alone. Jasmine gently introduced herself, trying her best to ease the tension in the room. She sat beside Ethan, offering him a warm smile, though she could see that he didn't respond at first. His gaze remained fixed on the outside world, distant and lost. But Jasmine wasn't discouraged. She knew that children like Ethan needed time to warm up to new people. So instead of pushing him, she quietly went about her work, making sure he was comfortable and well taken care of. As days passed, Jasmine began to establish a routine with Ethan. She helped him with meals, assisted him with his therapy, and did everything she could to make him feel less alone. She would talk to him about her day, tell him funny stories, and play his favorite music when he seemed down. Slowly but surely he began to open up. His small smiles, though rare, were worth every minute of effort. Jasmine had always believed that no one should be defined by their disability, and she made sure that Ethan felt seen and heard. However, it was Mr. Matthews who was hardest to reach. He seemed distant, always busy with his work and rarely interacting with Ethan. When he did come home, he would often just check in quickly, ensuring Ethan had everything he needed, and then retreat to his office. Jasmine noticed that he appeared burdened, as if the weight of his responsibilities was too much for him to bear. It was clear to her that Ethan's condition weighed heavily on him. He loved his son deeply, but he didn't know how to express it. One evening, Jasmine was feeding Ethan his dinner when she heard the sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway. She glanced up to see Mr. Matthews standing in the doorway, watching them quietly. His gaze lingered on his son, who was eating with a quiet concentration. For the first time, Jasmine saw something different in Mr. Matthews, an emotion she hadn't expected. He looked moved. His usual stern demeanor softened as he observed his son. He stood there for a moment, watching the interaction between Jasmine and Ethan, but said nothing. Jasmine, sensing his presence, offered him a polite smile. "Mr. Matthews," she said softly, "Ethan's doing well today. He's been responding to the music I've been playing for him." Mr. Matthews nodded slowly, but his eyes remained on Ethan. "Thank you," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "I can't tell you how much this means, Ethan. He's not the same since his mother passed away. I've struggled to connect with him. I don't know how to reach him." Jasmine didn't respond right away. She didn't know what to say to make him feel better. But she did know one thing. The love between a parent and child was something that couldn't be measured by words. It was something deeper. So instead of offering advice or sympathy, she simply said, "It's not always easy, but I'm here to help whenever you need me." For the first time in a long while, Mr. Matthews smiled. It was faint, but it was there. He took a step closer to Ethan, kneeling down beside him. "You're doing more than I could ever ask for," he whispered to Jasmine. "I appreciate everything you're doing." Jasmine's heart softened as she watched Mr. Matthews. She didn't know it then. But this moment, the moment when Mr. Matthews had truly acknowledged her presence, would be the start of something much bigger than she ever imagined. Little did she know that the simple act of feeding Ethan, of caring for him with love and patience, would set into motion a chain of events that would transform her life forever. Building a connection, the days passed, and Jasmine settled into her routine with Ethan. She learned the intricacies of his needs, how he preferred his meals, the specific music that calmed him, and the best ways to get him to open up. At first, Ethan barely acknowledged her presence. He had grown accustomed to people coming and going in his life, caregivers cycling in and out with no real understanding of him. His world had become small, just the four walls of his room and the shadows of his father's absent love. But Jasmine was different. She didn't treat him as a task, as someone to be taken care of from a distance. She treated him like a person, not just a patient. Jasmine's approach was simple but profound. She wasn't just there to help Ethan with his meals or assist him with physical therapy. She was there to be with him. Every afternoon after the morning routine was finished, she would sit beside him and talk. Sometimes she told him stories about her own life, growing up in a small neighborhood, her dreams of one day becoming a nurse, and how she had always wanted to help people. Other times she would simply sit in silence, letting the music play in the background, letting the quiet companionship grow between them. Slowly but surely, Ethan started to respond. He would tilt his head when Jasmine spoke, his eyes following her every movement. At first it was small gestures, just a flicker of recognition, but it was enough to fill Jasmine with hope. It was clear that Ethan was capable of more than he had let on. Perhaps all he needed was someone who believed in him, and Jasmine was willing to be that person. One afternoon, while Jasmine was feeding him, she noticed Ethan's hands twitching slightly. She had seen this before, when someone was trying to communicate but didn't have the strength to speak or the ability to move freely. It was subtle, but it was progress. She leaned forward, her voice gentle. "Ethan, do you want to tell me something?" For a long moment, Ethan remained silent, his eyes searching her face as if trying to find the right words in his mind. Finally, his hand moved, slowly, but it was clear. He placed his fingers over the spoon she had been holding, directing it to his mouth. It was the smallest gesture, but it was the first time he had done something like that on his own. Jasmine's heart swelled with pride as she smiled at him. "You did that all by yourself," she said softly, feeling the weight of that moment. Ethan's lips curled into a small, shy smile. It wasn't much, but to Jasmine it meant the world. She knew then that she was getting through to him. Ethan was starting to trust her. He was starting to see her as someone who wasn't just there to do a job, but someone who genuinely cared. It was in those small moments that Jasmine realized something profound. She wasn't just taking care of Ethan. She was building something with him. A relationship, a bond that was unspoken but deeply felt, and in return, he was teaching her something she hadn't expected to learn: the power of patience and persistence. Meanwhile, Mr. Matthews continued to remain a distant figure in Ethan's life. Jasmine noticed how often he retreated into his study, his face buried in work, leaving Ethan alone in the room with her. There were brief moments when Mr. Matthews would check in on them, offering a quick thank you or a comment about how Ethan seemed to be responding well to the routine. But those moments were few and far between. Jasmine could see the weariness in his eyes whenever he glanced at his son. He loved Ethan, but he didn't know how to reach him. His presence was there, but his heart was somewhere else, buried under the weight of his business empire, the responsibility of being a single father, and the overwhelming guilt of not being able to provide his son with the emotional connection he needed. Jasmine felt this too. She saw it in Mr. Matthews' eyes every time he passed by the door to Ethan's room. But instead of retreating into the background, Jasmine decided to take a step forward. She knew that Ethan wasn't the only one who needed help. Mr. Matthews was struggling too. His son's condition was a daily reminder of the limitations of his wealth and success. He could buy the best doctors, the best equipment, but there was no price tag for the connection he was missing with Ethan. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, Jasmine noticed Mr. Matthews standing by the window, staring out into the distance. His posture was stiff, his hands folded in front of him as though he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Jasmine hesitated, but she knew this might be her only chance to connect with him. "Mr. Matthews?" she called softly from the doorway. He turned, surprised to see her standing there. "Jasmine," he replied, his voice quiet. "I didn't mean to interrupt your evening. I just was thinking." She stepped closer, careful not to intrude. "You're worried about Ethan, aren't you?" Mr. Matthews sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "Every day, every hour. I want to be there for him, but I don't know how. He's my son, and yet I feel like I've failed him." Jasmine listened quietly, understanding the pain in his words. "I don't think you failed him," she said gently. "But maybe you need to let him in too. It's not just about taking care of him physically. He needs you emotionally, Mr. Matthews. And I think you need him too." For a long moment, Mr. Matthews didn't speak. He seemed lost in thought, grappling with the weight of Jasmine's words. And then finally he looked at her with a quiet sincerity. "I don't know how to do that," he admitted. "I don't know how to reach him." Jasmine gave him a small, encouraging smile. "Start small," she suggested. "You don't have to have all the answers. Just be there for him." "He's starting to respond, Mr. Matthews, and that's because you've been there just by showing up." It was a simple piece of advice, but it struck a chord with Mr. Matthews. In the days that followed, Jasmine noticed a subtle change in him. He started spending more time with Ethan, sitting beside him, talking to him, and even just being with him. The quiet moments of connection began to grow, small at first, but significant in their impact. As Jasmine watched their relationship begin to shift, she realized that she had helped not only Ethan but Mr. Matthews too. It wasn't about big gestures or grand gestures. It was about showing up, being present, and allowing space for something meaningful to happen. By the time the weeks had passed, the bond between Jasmine and Ethan had deepened in ways neither of them had expected. And it wasn't just a bond of caregiving. It was a bond of trust, of mutual respect, and of hope for a future that once seemed uncertain. Jasmine had entered this family to care for a boy in need. But in doing so, she had transformed their lives in ways that none of them could have imagined. A life-changing moment, Jasmine's connection with Ethan had grown deeper with each passing day. She had entered the home of the billionaire Mr. Matthews as a caregiver, a stranger to the family. But now she had become a constant figure in their lives. Ethan had begun to trust her, and although he still struggled to communicate in ways that others could understand, there was something different in his demeanor. His small smiles had turned into bursts of laughter, and he began to reach out to her when she entered the room. A quiet but powerful acknowledgement of the bond they were building. But it wasn't just Ethan who was changing. Mr. Matthews, the distant father, had started to observe their interactions more closely. At first he had watched with skepticism, unsure of what kind of effect this young woman could have on his son. But as the weeks wore on, the changes in Ethan became undeniable, and for the first time in a long time, Mr. Matthews felt a stirring of hope. Jasmine wasn't just caring for Ethan, she was reaching him in ways he never thought possible. On one of those quiet afternoons, as Jasmine helped Ethan with his therapy exercises, Mr. Matthews found himself watching them from the doorway. He stood there, hidden in the shadows, trying not to make his presence known. He observed the gentle way Jasmine spoke to Ethan, her words soft and encouraging but firm when necessary. She didn't treat him like a child in need of pity. She treated him like a person. Jasmine's patience was evident, and she didn't rush him through his exercises. She understood that each small achievement was a victory, no matter how long it took. Ethan, who had been unable to move his legs for so long, was now showing signs of slight movement. His small fingers twitched when Jasmine helped him press the button on his favorite game, and his eyes lit up when he succeeded in moving the game character for the first time. It was a moment of pure joy, and for the first time Mr. Matthews felt tears well up in his eyes. He had always been focused on the financial aspects of his life, the businesses, the deals, the contracts, but in that moment, He realized how little he had paid attention to the emotional needs of his son. It was as though Jasmine had opened a door that he had closed off long ago. Mr. Matthews took a step forward, clearing his throat. The sound was small but enough to make Jasmine pause. She turned around, her face breaking into a warm smile when she saw him standing in the doorway. "Mr. Matthews," she said softly, as if she had anticipated his presence without realizing it. He took a deep breath, trying to find the words. "Jasmine," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I've been watching you with Ethan. I've seen how you've been with him, how patient, how caring you are, and I have to admit I didn't think you'd be able to reach him." Jasmine's smile faltered slightly, unsure of where the conversation was going. She hadn't expected praise, certainly not from someone like Mr. Matthews, who was often so consumed with his business life. "I'm just doing my job," she replied modestly, her tone humble. "Ethan just needed someone to believe in him. That's all." Mr. Matthews nodded, but there was a deep sadness in his eyes. "I didn't know how to believe in him. I've been so caught up in everything else that I didn't realize how much I was neglecting him. You've done more for him than I have in the past few years." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat as she realized the depth of his confession. She didn't say anything at first, letting the silence between them speak louder than any words could. It wasn't her place to judge him for his past. Instead, she simply nodded, acknowledging the weight of his realization. The room was thick with emotion as Mr. Matthews finally stepped into the room, moving toward Ethan's bedside. He stood beside his son, his face softening as he looked down at him. "I've always been so focused on making sure everything was perfect for you, Ethan," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I think I forgot what you really needed. The one thing that money can't buy. Time. Connection." Jasmine watched the scene unfold before her, a part of her heart aching for the father who had been so disconnected from his son. But she also felt a sense of triumph. Mr. Matthews was beginning to understand what truly mattered. The shift was small, but it was there, a change that couldn't be ignored. Mr. Matthews looked up at Jasmine, his expression vulnerable. "I've been blind to what really matters," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been so wrapped up in the business and the success that I forgot how important it is to just be here. For him. You've reminded me of that, and for that I'll be forever grateful." Jasmine was stunned. This wasn't the man she had first met, the man who seemed detached from his son's struggles. This was someone different, someone who was learning, growing, and willing to make the necessary changes. She hadn't expected this level of self-awareness from someone so powerful, so consumed by his empire. But here he was, admitting his mistakes and opening his heart to the son he had once been too busy to understand. "I'm just glad to be here for both of you," Jasmine said softly, her words sincere. "Ethan is amazing and he deserves everything. He deserves you too." The words seemed to hang in the air, their weight heavy in the stillness of the room. Mr. Matthews swallowed hard, his voice breaking slightly. I know he deserves more from me, and I will do everything in my power to be the father he deserves." For the first time since Jasmine had started working in the Matthews household, she felt a genuine sense of peace. She had always believed in the power of kindness, of patience, and of love. And now, she was witnessing that same belief take root in the very heart of this billionaire businessman. As she left the room that day, she felt a warmth in her chest, knowing that the connection between Ethan and his father was beginning to heal. She had played a role in that healing, and it was the most rewarding thing she had ever experienced. But little did she know, this was just the beginning. This small, life-changing moment was about to set in motion a series of events that would not only transform Mr. Matthews and Ethan's relationship, but Jasmine's life as well. What she didn't know was that she had just planted the seed for something much bigger. The future was unfolding in ways none of them could have predicted. Unexpected praise, the days that followed felt like a quiet revelation for Jasmine. Ethan's progress, though slow, was evident with each passing week. The small gestures that seemed insignificant to others, his hand twitching, his faint smiles, were monumental milestones in his journey. What had once felt like a hopeless routine was transforming into a shared experience, something more profound than just caregiving. Jasmine wasn't just a helper to Ethan. She was becoming a part of his world, and he, in turn, was becoming a part of hers. But even as Ethan's connection with Jasmine deepened, She still noticed the distance between her and Mr. Matthews. He had been more present lately, offering the occasional word of thanks or a brief conversation. But there was something about him that remained closed off. His quiet demeanor, his tendency to retreat into his office after a brief check-in had not changed. He would smile at her when their paths crossed, but there was a subtle wall between them, an unspoken barrier of distance that Jasmine couldn't seem to break through. She didn't mind it much. Her job was to care for Ethan, after all. But part of her wondered if Mr. Matthews would ever truly acknowledge the changes she had helped bring about. How could someone like him, successful, powerful, and always in control, understand the value of what she did for his son? She could feel his gaze on her from time to time, watching her as she interacted with Ethan, but his compliments were rare, and even then, they were often brief. One afternoon, as Jasmine finished feeding Ethan and prepared to leave for the day, she caught sight of Mr. Matthews standing near the door, his posture stiff and his face unreadable. He had been standing there for a while, quietly observing her work, and the moment their eyes met, a flicker of something crossed his face, a mix of gratitude and something else she couldn't quite place. "Jasmine," Mr. Matthews called, his voice steady but with a hint of hesitation. "Could you stay for a moment? There's something I'd like to talk to you about." Jasmine, a little surprised, nodded and set down the tray of food she had been cleaning. She had grown used to his distant nature, and while his request wasn't entirely unexpected, it still made her curious. What could he possibly want to discuss? "Of course," she said, walking toward him. "Is everything all right with Ethan?" Mr. Matthews smiled, though it was brief, as he turned to lead her to a sitting area in the corner of the room. He gestured for her to sit, and Jasmine did so, her mind racing. There was an air of formality to his movements that suggested he was preparing to discuss something important. She sat down, waiting for him to speak. "I've been watching you with Ethan," Mr. Matthews began, his tone quieter now, almost reluctant. "You've made a huge difference in his life, Jasmine." "I can see it." Jasmine wasn't sure how to respond. She had always tried to keep things professional, focusing on her work with Ethan. Compliments from Mr. Matthews were few and far between, and she had learned not to expect them. But something in his voice made her pause, and she could feel a slight shift in the air, a change in his demeanor. "I don't know how to express this properly," Mr. Matthews continued, his eyes meeting hers, "but I don't think I ever truly understood what Ethan needed. All I could see was his disability, the limitations. I thought the best way to help him was with the best technology, the best doctors. But it was you, Jasmine. It's you who has helped him make progress, even in ways I didn't think were possible." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. She had never expected him to acknowledge her impact in such a direct way. She had never done this job for praise, but hearing Mr. Matthews speak so openly about her work made her feel something she hadn't anticipated: validation. It was as if all the hard work, all the long hours she had spent caring for Ethan, had finally been recognized. "I've watched you, day in and day out, interacting with Ethan," Mr. Matthews said, his voice softening, "and I've seen him change. I don't just mean his physical progress, though that's remarkable, but the way he reacts to you. He trusts you. I think for the first time he feels like someone truly sees him, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a person." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat. She had never considered herself a miracle worker. She simply did what she could to help Ethan feel heard and cared for. But hearing Mr. Matthews speak like this, acknowledging the emotional bond she had built with Ethan, made her realize how much of a difference she had truly made. It was more than just feeding him or helping with his therapy. She had given him a sense of worth, a sense of dignity that he hadn't felt in a long time. "I don't know how to thank you for that," Mr. Matthews said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've done more for Ethan than anyone could have expected, and I'm not sure how I can repay you for what you've done, but I want to try." Jasmine's mind raced, unsure of what he meant by that. She had been hired as a caregiver, and that was all she had ever expected. But Mr. Matthews was looking at her in a way that made her realize this conversation was about more than just professional praise. "I appreciate your kind words, Mr. Matthews," she replied, her voice humble, "but I'm just doing my job. I'm here for Ethan, that's all." Mr. Matthews shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "No, it's more than that. What you've done for him. It's not just about what you've done for his care. It's about his heart. I've been so focused on fixing things from the outside, trying to control everything, But you've shown me that real change comes from the inside. Jasmine sat quietly, processing his words. It was a humbling experience to be recognized in such a way. And as she looked at Mr. Matthews, who was no longer the cold, distant figure she had first met, she could see the transformation in him too. He wasn't just talking about Ethan's progress anymore. He was talking about his own growth as a father. For the first time, Jasmine saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes, a glimmer of belief in his ability to be the father Ethan needed. The conversation ended with a promise from Mr. Matthews. He would make sure Jasmine's contributions were acknowledged. He would find a way to support her, to help her continue her work with Ethan, and perhaps even give her the opportunity to grow further in her own life. As Jasmine left the room that evening, she felt a mix of emotions, gratitude, pride, and an unexpected sense of connection with the man who had once seemed so distant. The praise she had received was more than just recognition. It was a sign of the changes happening not only in Ethan's life, but in Mr. Matthews as well. And in that moment, Jasmine knew that this was the beginning of something much greater than she could have ever imagined. The unexpected offer. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet, growing sense of accomplishment for Jasmine. Each day she continued to care for Ethan with the same patience and dedication she had always given him. Ethan was making noticeable progress, no longer the distant, withdrawn child he had once been. He laughed more often, his eyes sparkled with curiosity, and he was starting to communicate in his own way, through gestures, glances, and a slowly improving ability to express himself. Jasmine couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment as she watched him thrive. Every small achievement felt like a personal victory, not just for Ethan, but for herself too. But as much as she felt proud of the changes happening with Ethan, something was shifting in Mr. Matthews, something Jasmine couldn't quite put her finger on. He had become more present in his son's life, though he still struggled with the balance between his responsibilities as a father and the demands of his business empire. He was trying at least to spend more time with Ethan, something Jasmine couldn't help but notice. But she also knew he was still carrying the weight of guilt and regret on his shoulders. No matter how many times he apologized to her for not being there for Ethan, it was clear that the burden of being a single father to a disabled child was something he couldn't shake. One evening, after another long day of helping Ethan with his therapy and feeding him his dinner, Jasmine was finishing up when she noticed Mr. Matthews standing in the doorway. This time he wasn't just quietly observing them. He seemed different. His posture was still stiff, but there was something more open in his eyes, something she hadn't seen before. It was as though he was finally ready to admit something, ready to acknowledge the role Jasmine had played in not just Ethan's care, but in his own personal transformation as a father. "Jasmine," he called, his voice a little more relaxed than usual. "Can you come in here for a moment?" Jasmine wiped her hands on a towel and walked toward him. She couldn't help but notice the shift in his tone. There was no longer that cold distance that had always been there before. Mr. Matthews stepped aside to let her into the room, a large office that was starkly different from the warmth of the rest of the house. The walls were filled with framed awards, family photos, and expensive art. But despite the luxurious surroundings, Jasmine sensed a subtle tension in the air. "Please, have a seat," he said, motioning to the chair opposite his desk. Jasmine sat down, her heart beating a little faster. She had no idea what this conversation would be about, but she could sense that something important was coming. Mr. Matthews took a deep breath, sitting down across from her. He seemed to be gathering his thoughts, as though carefully choosing his words. After a moment, he met her gaze, his face serious but warm. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began. "About Ethan, about the changes I've seen in him, and, well, about what you've done for him." Jasmine shifted in her seat, slightly uncomfortable with the praise. She wasn't used to receiving recognition, especially not from someone like Mr. Matthews. "I'm just doing my job. Mr. Matthews, I'm here for Ethan." Mr. Matthews nodded, but there was a quiet understanding in his eyes. "It's more than that, Jasmine. What you've done for him, it goes beyond just feeding him and helping with his physical therapy. You've done something I didn't even realize was possible. You've helped him live again. You've given him hope. You've given me hope." Jasmine felt a lump form in her throat as she listened to his words. She hadn't expected to hear this from him, not after everything that had happened. She had always approached her work with Ethan out of love and care, never expecting anything in return. But hearing Mr. Matthews speak like this made her realize just how much her presence had meant to him. Not just as a father, but as a man. He paused for a moment, then leaned forward slightly, his eyes focused intently on hers. "And I want to help you, Jasmine. I want to repay you for everything you've done. For Ethan, for me. I've been thinking about your future, your dreams. I know you've been working hard, but I can see you've got so much potential. You shouldn't have to struggle to reach your goals." Jasmine blinked, caught off guard by his sudden change in direction. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice quiet, unsure of where this conversation was headed. Mr. Matthews leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "I want to sponsor your education. I want to make sure you have the resources to pursue your dreams. You've shown an incredible amount of heart and skill, and I think you deserve the opportunity to go further. I'll cover your tuition, books, and living expenses. You can attend any school you want. You can become whatever you want to be." Jasmine's mouth went dry as she tried to process what he was saying. She had heard of scholarships before, but this was something else entirely. A billionaire businessman offering to sponsor her education? It sounded like a dream, too far out of reach to be real. She had always struggled to pay for her classes, never knowing if she could afford another semester. But now here was Mr. Matthews offering her everything she needed to build the future she had always dreamed of. Jasmine began, but her words caught in her throat. She couldn't even begin to fathom what was happening. "Why? I don't understand. You've already done so much for me. I'm just doing my job." "I don't expect," Mr. Matthews interrupted gently. "You've done more than just your job, Jasmine. You've made a real difference in Ethan's life, and you've taught me something that no amount of wealth could ever teach me. How to truly be present for the people who matter. You've shown me what really matters, and now I want to make sure you have the chance to live your own dreams. You deserve it." Tears welled up in Jasmine's eyes as she sat there, overwhelmed by his generosity and sincerity. She had never imagined that something like this could happen to her. Her life had always been a series of small, hard-earned steps, working multiple jobs, scraping by to make ends meet. But now everything was changing. She nodded slowly, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you. I don't even know how to thank you for this. This is everything I've ever wanted. But I don't want to take advantage of you." Mr. Matthews smiled, his expression warm and kind. "You're not taking advantage of me, Jasmine. You're just getting what you deserve." That night, as Jasmine left the Matthews mansion, her mind was spinning with thoughts of the future. She had always believed in herself, but now she had something she had never imagined. A chance. A real chance to build the life she had always dreamed of. And it was all because of a simple act of kindness. A kindness that had transformed not only her life, but also the lives of everyone involved. The transformation. Begins. Jasmine sat at her small kitchen table that night, the quiet hum of the city outside her apartment window doing little to soothe the whirlwind of thoughts racing in her mind. She couldn't stop thinking about the conversation she had had with Mr. Matthews earlier that day. The offer was still fresh, almost surreal. How had it happened? A single conversation, an unexpected recognition, and suddenly her entire future seemed to have shifted course. For so long, Jasmine had lived a life defined by struggle. Every dollar she earned went toward paying bills, supporting her family, and keeping herself afloat. Education had always been a distant dream, something she thought about in the quiet moments before sleep, but never believed could be her reality. She had always told herself that her worth wasn't in her degree, but in the care she gave to others. But now she had an opportunity, a chance to create a future she had never dared to imagine. The offer from Mr. Matthews felt like a dream, and yet his words echoed in her mind. "You've shown me what really matters, and now I want to make sure you have the chance to live your own dreams. You deserve it." The sincerity in his voice still resonated deep within her, reminding her of how far she had come, even when she didn't believe in herself. She leaned back in her chair, letting her hands rest on the table. Her mind was already racing ahead, imagining what it would be like to attend a prestigious university, to finally pursue her dreams of becoming a nurse. To not have to worry about how she would pay for textbooks or whether she could afford the next semester. Mr. Matthews's offer wasn't just financial. It was an emotional shift. He believed in her in a way she hadn't even believed in herself. But with that belief came pressure. Jasmine knew the weight of the decision in front of her. Could she really accept such a generous offer? She wasn't someone who was used to receiving help, let alone from someone as powerful as Mr. Matthews. Her pride, though she had no reason to be ashamed of it, made her feel reluctant. Would accepting his help change the way people saw her? Would it feel like she owed him something more than she was willing to give? The doubts crept in and she couldn't silence them completely. But then she thought about Ethan. She thought about how far he had come since she began working with him. She had seen him grow, not just physically but emotionally as well. The change was subtle at first, a little more movement in his fingers, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. But over time his transformation had become more pronounced. Ethan, the child who had once seemed so lost and disconnected, was beginning to trust again. And that was because of her. And Mr. Matthews, though distant at times, had seen it too. He had recognized her worth not just as a caregiver, but as someone who could create change in his son's life. With that realization, the doubts began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. She had always believed that she was meant for more, and now was her chance to prove it. She could be more than just a caregiver. She could be someone who made a real difference in the world, and she was going to take this opportunity, not because she felt obligated, but because she deserved it. The next morning, she walked into the Matthews mansion with a renewed sense of confidence. The quiet house felt different today, like it was holding its breath waiting for the next chapter to unfold. She found Mr. Matthews in the study, where he often retreated to deal with work. He looked up when she entered, his gaze steady and warm. "Jasmine," he said, giving her a small but knowing smile. "How are you feeling about the offer?" Jasmine hesitated for only a moment before speaking. "I've thought about it a lot, Mr. Matthews, and I've decided to accept. I want to take this opportunity. I want to make something of myself." Mr. Matthews' face softened, and for the first time since she had started working with him, she saw a genuine, heartfelt smile. "I'm proud of you, Jasmine. I know this isn't easy, but you've made the right choice. You deserve everything that comes next." The words, though simple, were a validation Jasmine had never expected. They were the words she had always wanted to hear, from someone who understood what it took to truly transform. She felt the weight lift off her shoulders, the uncertainty dissolving into excitement for what was to come. Over the next few weeks, Jasmine worked with the university admissions office, filling out forms and applying for scholarships with Mr. Matthews's financial support. She was careful not to let herself get overwhelmed, taking things one step at a time. She could feel the world shifting beneath her feet as she navigated this new chapter of her life. It was a thrilling, almost surreal feeling. But there was still the matter of Ethan. She had to say goodbye, though the thought of leaving him behind filled her with a mixture of sadness and hope. She had become so much more than just a caregiver to him. She had become a source of stability, a constant presence in his life. She knew that her departure would be difficult for him, but she also knew that he had come so far because of the bond they had shared. She promised herself that she would return to visit him whenever possible, that their connection wouldn't be broken.